Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you...
Hello and welcome to Self-Inflicted Aural Nostalgia, the Guided by Voices podcast, every GBV LP, every 2 weeks. Today we'll be taking a look at the band's only record of 2013, English Little League. But first, as usual, all music heard in this podcast is played and owned by Guided by Voices. Any reviews or materials cited are owned by their respective creators, and of course, all hail Jeff Warren's Guided by Voices database, located at gbvdb.com. Visit everygbvlp.com to subscribe to future episodes or listen to past episodes of this podcast, and write to me if you want at jeff@everygbvlp.com. Now let's get to the show. Well, we finally escaped from the tractor beam pull of 2012, where we've been trapped for the last 3 episodes. Instead, we've managed to catapult ourselves all the way to the year 2013 in order to look at the band's 19th record, English Little League. And while this year saw only one Guided by Voices full length, there was also a 6-track GBV EP, Down by the Racetrack, which came out in January. A few months later was the sole EP from a new side project called The Sunflower Logic. 2013 also saw the release of 2 Robert Pollard solo LPs, Honey Locust Honky Tonk and Blazing Gentleman. Not to mention there were 2 Circus Devils records released on the same day. And if all of that wasn't enough, Pollard debuted yet another side project, Teenage Guitar. This was just Pollard fucking around in his new quote-unquote home studio. And since this flurry of releases was pretty much business as usual for Bob, let's return to the topic of Pollard's, shall we say, prolific nature. Now, in the last episode, I gave my theory as to why I personally think he releases so much stuff, but now I want to talk about what that means as a fan. Basically, how do people like us, who love Pollard and think he's a genius, manage to deal with the sheer amount of stuff he puts out? What part does that prolific nature play in how we either negatively or positively look at Bob and his work? And finally, is it possible to actually appreciate or even listen to the mountain of work he's produced? These are fundamental questions when dealing with this band because it's something you wrestle with every time you reach for a GBV record. The sheer fact that there are dozens of albums means you have to choose, and that's of course when all you're talking about is GBV. When you add in all of Pollard's other projects, it's more than 100, which makes it more of an issue and more of a challenge. Because this is so core to trying to understand, if not just wrap your arms around Bob and his music, this is something that gets mentioned over and over again in reviews and interviews. Magnet Magazine, a publication so friendly to Pollard they put him on the cover numerous times, framed it this way: "People feel like they can't keep up," adding that people were saying that back in the early 90s and it's only gotten worse. Website Uprocks wrote a whole story about this called "Can a Musical Artist Be Too Prolific for Their Own Good?" Setting up his argument, author Chris Morgan writes, "The knee-jerk reaction may be to dismiss this question out of hand. How could more music from an artist you love be a negative? Can there be too much of a good thing?" His opinion, finally, is yes, and he offers up this sober assessment. Not every Guided by Voices song is good. There's probably nobody who would argue otherwise. This gets at the heart of the Bob's too prolific argument. As Morgan writes, the main issue here is diminishing returns, or perhaps quality over quantity. Paste Magazine agrees, proclaiming that Robert Pollard is a classic example in confusion with quantity versus quality. The writer Jay Perini, in an essay for the New York Times Book Review entitled "The More They Write, the More They Write," looked at this phenomenon in authors, stating, "Overproduction can also damage the quality of a writer's prose. Anthony Burgess once suspects would have been well advised to slow down. There is a frenetic, distorted quality to many of his novels that broadcasts the haste of their composition." Virtually every prolific writer from Balzac to Joyce Carol Oates and Gore Vidal has dull passages, even whole books worth tossing out. Nevertheless, telling these writers to slow down is like telling a bird not to fly. "I write a lot because I'm a writer," Mr. Vidal said in his lofty Mandarin voice. "That's what I do." First of all, I feel that a lot of that could be applied to Pollard. A number of GBV LPs, including the stretch of reunion albums we're discussing now, could be trimmed down considerably. And, quite frankly, I think that entire records by some of his side projects, or even his solo stuff, are totally disposable. The teenage guitar stuff that started to appear this year being a perfect example. Secondly, as much as I admire Jay Perini, the guy who wrote a novel about Melville, for Christ's sakes, his argument there at the end seems pretty flimsy. After all, no one's telling a bird not to fly, and no one's telling Gore Vidal or any of those other writers that they can't write. What we're saying is, if you publish a book every 8 months, and it reads like basically a first draft, then your reputation's going to suffer, and after a while, your readers are going to lose patience and interest, choosing instead authors who prefer to completely bake their ideas and their books. Pollard, however, seems to agree with Vidal, stating, "My philosophy is, if you like to write and play music, why hold yourself back? I don't see it as being a diluting thing." Again, no one's saying he can't write songs, let alone play music. He's an adult, he can do whatever he wants, whether it's dunk a basketball, drink beer, or make more records with his friends. But if he's going to release 3 or 5 or 7 records a year, and he expects anyone to pay attention to them or care on some level or listen to them more than once, then that's a different thing. Because he is, by sheer definition, diluting both the market and the interest for his work. And believe me, I speak from experience. As a longtime fan of his, I often feel like Lucille Ball in the Chocolate Factory scene of I Love Lucy. Pollard puts out an LP and before you know it, there's another, and another, and another. There's barely any time to let one sink in before it comes out with something new. It's quite often just too much to deal with. Pollard's actually said, if I could put out an album a month, that would be no problem. To which I would say, that may not be a problem for him, but it would be for anyone who likes him and wants to acquire, not to mention digest, what he produces. But Bob and his label seem to disagree. In the marketing materials for the record we're discussing now, English Little League, they wrote, "The Guided by Voices project, as any fan knows, both requires and rewards effortful listening, and lazy bones who dismiss the volume of Pollard's output as basically impossible misunderstand the care with which he assembles his dreamscapes." It goes on to characterize such complaints as whining. Pretty much every bit of that strikes me as complete bullshit. It's pretty much impossible to reap the rewards from any sort of listening when there's a machine gun attack of material. Really great LPs do indeed pay dividends over time, but one of the reasons for this is because fans are allowed to enjoy them over time. Not to mention those albums contain rich veins of material that allow listeners to dig in and discover hidden gems. Think of some of Bob's favorite albums, something deep and unwieldy like The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis. That LP has layers, there's subtlety, there's a vastness. It contains details and touches that you can only appreciate over time. It's like a 5-course meal where you savor every bite. Pollard, by contrast, has seemingly turned the consumption of his music into some sort of hot dog eating contest. And while sure, the flip side is just as ridiculous, whether it's Guns N' Roses, My Bloody Valentine, or the Wrens, bands who have labored over a single record for decades, and of course some writers go through the same thing. It took Harold Broadkey 25 years to write his first novel. I can only again speak from experience and say that the amount of stuff that Bob releases is a problem. It's a problem in terms of acquiring his stuff, and it's a problem when it comes to giving his music its due in terms of any of my attention. Because there's really only so much money or time in the day. And the fact is, while I think the world of Pollard and Guided by Voices is my favorite band, there's plenty of other music out there, new and old, I want to seek out and listen to. And again, when you add in the fact that a whole bunch of what Pollard puts out is dashed off and that Bob's quality control filter is somewhat lacking, that adds a whole other dimension to the argument. As others have noted, a whole lot of Pollard's recorded output just isn't very good, and it becomes a chore having to ignore or separate out the bad songs or projects from all the otherwise good stuff. And quite frankly, if Pollard was a more keen judge of his own talent, we wouldn't have to. I also think you can indeed draw a direct correlation of quality to quantity. Because even though Bob may answer in reply to the charge of being too prolific, that's what I do, I love to write songs. Where I find real fault is in releasing so many songs which are really just sketches. I think that if he spent twice as much time on half as many songs, what he eventually released would be of a higher quality. But I guess this is all because, while most musicians look at the composed song as merely a blueprint to what will eventually be recorded, Pollard usually takes the written, or just plain documented, song as the finished product. But what if his favorite groups had done that? John Lennon's demo version of Strawberry Fields Forever sounds just like dozens of Guided by Voices songs. What made that track into a song for the ages is the fact that the Beatles kept working at it and developing new ideas to supplement, complement, and expand beyond Lennon's original vision. It's pretty rare for Bob to ever do that. He either just sticks with the basic instrumentation of the demo, or else he records his songs with a basic band format. And when producers like Rick Ocasek have tried to add other touches or instrumental flourishes, both Pollard and his band, and even most of his fans, cried foul. So what we're left with is a whole lot of sketches, and the fact is it's not very fun to listen to the back of a napkin. However, what's interesting is that in recent years, I write this being halfway through 2018, Bob's seemed to either realize this or else he's finally slowing down. Pretty much everything he's released in the past few years has been really good. Even a semi-novelty side project like Cash Rivers is surprisingly listenable, not to mention really funny, and his last couple of solo records, not to mention new side projects like ESP Ohio and Rickard Wiki, were fully realized. Whether this means we'll never again hear lo-fi basement recordings like those that were sprinkled throughout the reunion LPs, or even a ragtag project like Teenage Guitar, not to mention another GBB album like Please Be Honest, remains to be seen. But suffice it to say that the recent past has seen Pollard be as disciplined as he's ever been in his 30 years as a recording artist. The records August by Cake, How Do You Spell Heaven, and Space Gun are all really, really solid records, and I hope this streak continues with next year's Zeppelin over China and beyond. But now let's get back to English Little League. Now, going in, I have to admit that not only is this my least favorite of the 6 record run of reunion LPs, but if I were forced to rank all of GBB's studio records, I'd put it dead last. It has a few good songs to be sure, but it doesn't have any truly standout tracks, and as a total experience, it's just not a good listen. However, an interesting thing to note about the LP is that marketing materials accompanying the release of the record noted that Pollard has recently installed a studio in his house. Bob named his home studio, in true Pollard fashion, the Public Hi-Fi Balloon. A number of tracks from Little League were recorded there, the first of which was A Burning Glass. I'm not sure the studio consists of anything other than a closet in his trusty boombox. Anyway, Paste magazine reacted to the news by anticipating an even greater flood of material. So expect even more, and more, and more, probably exceeding the 3 GBV albums per year he promised in 2012. Most of English was recorded there. And yet a more sustained explosion of material did not, in fact, emerge. The Guided by Voices database lists not much more than a dozen songs recorded at the Public Hi-Fi Balloon. He used it to record the Sunflower Logic EP, Clouds on the Polar Landscape, some songs that ended up on Suitcase 4, a few tracks for his solo record Honey Locust Honky Tonk from the same year, and the first Teenage Guitar record. But that's about it. So whatever happened to his studio, he didn't use it much, or ever as far as I can tell, past 2013. In fact, even the records that feature just him playing all the instruments, like the second Teenage Guitar record or the GBV LP Please Be Honest, were recorded in a studio rather than at home. I think this speaks to what I talked about in the Bears for Lunch episode about Pollard being a former jock. As much as he finally rebelled against coaches in team sports, it was in his blood. This means that, for as much as a singular genius as he is, Bob is, at heart, a team player, and he views music as a team sport. So the idea of him spending days or weeks holed up in a studio chasing the perfect sound, a la Tom Scholz making the first Boston record, was just never going to be the case. Or maybe it was also a patience thing, because as you could hear from that clip we just listened to, the stuff he recorded in his home studio doesn't sound that great. Pollard may write melodies that remind you of Brian Wilson, but he doesn't have the persistence in chasing his own pet sounds. Either way, the Public Hi-Fi Balloon seems to have been grounded shortly after it took off. In terms of the cover for English Little League, it's probably one of the most Pollard sleeves ever. The collage is done on a page of old college-ruled paper. It's dirty and stained, and there's writing on either side seeping through. The album and band name have been typed out on an old typewriter. It's a nice cover and a good match for the music found inside. The only thing disappointing is that there's no lyric sheet. In the past, Bob's done that because he doesn't think highly of the lyrics. I'm not sure why he hasn't included them here. That being said, the interior design of the LP does have the lyrics to one song, A Burning Glass. I'm not sure why he chose this song out of the others. At first I thought it might be because it's somehow the most lyrically personal or significant on the album. Sort of how R.E.M., a band famous at the time for inscrutable lyrics and not including lyrics with their LPs, printed the words to just one track, World Leader Pretend, from their 1988 major label debut, Green. They did this because, as singer and lyricist Michael Stipe said, "I think to be able to read World Leader Pretend as well as listening to it will help clarify a lot of the intention behind Green." I'm not sure if Pollard was thinking along the same lines. If so, it doesn't help a ton, since the lyrics to A Burning Glass are pretty baffling. I'll talk about them more in detail when we look at the LP song by song. Anyway, the personnel on the record held from the previous 3 records, something that wouldn't last past the next LP, 2014's Motivational Jumpsuit. I'll talk about that in the next episode. The record spawned 4 singles: Flunky Minnows, Islands, She Talks in Rainbows, Trash Can Full of Nails, and Xeno Pariah. This is sort of odd since, even at the height of their 90s popularity, they didn't release more than 2 singles per record. And the fact that all 4 singles came out within a few weeks of each other shows that GBV's label was issuing these mainly for the benefit of the fans. Plus, some of the songs chosen just weren't really good. I mean, Trash Can Full of Nails is an okay song, but it's hardly single material. But again, it's Bob's band and he can do what he wants. Also, their UK record company, Fire, compiled all the singles' B-sides into a 7-song EP called Glue On Bicycle. In reviewing English Little League, Pitchfork, giving it a 6.8, wrote that, like so many GBV albums before it, the LP gathers a couple of all-timers and a few respectably jagged pop rockers, together with several total train wrecks, and calls it an LP, adding that, while it's perfectly pleasant from moment to moment, the whole never congeals. And while the AV Club gave the record a B, saying that, it remains a pleasure to hear GBV doing what it does best, cranking out song after song. It also wrote that English Little League is decidedly overstuffed at 17 songs, adding that the one-off sketches that were somehow endearing on albums like B1000 and Alien Lanes come off simply as filler here. Website Popstash wrote that a few of Pollard's numbers start out promisingly enough, like Crybaby 4-Star Hotel and Know Me Is Heavy, before the typically surreal lyrics veer into cringeworthy territory, and his baritone goes wildly out of tune, and not in a charmingly amateurish way. The review also wonders whether Pollard having his own label is a good thing, writing that, perhaps the 21st century model of releasing records through one's own label has its downside, adding that, even after repeated spins, English Little League sounds like the perfect illustration of the law of diminishing returns. It's C-grade guided by voices at best. Pollard, as a former teacher, probably didn't like that. Anyway, let's look at this LP song by song. The record kicks off with Xeno Pariah.
Xeno Pariah, get out of the pool, I'll fly you to school to get something inside.
This is a really awesome song that has about 20 seconds of nice jangly guitar before Pollard and the power chords come in. It's one of the LP's best songs, so it's a great way to start the record. Pitchfork called the track the best first shot of GBV's second act, a sharp, clear-eyed rocker with a head lodge hook all its own. In terms of the song's title, xeno is a Greek prefix meaning foreign. This is why it appears in the word xenophobia, which can be defined as an intense or irrational dislike or fear of people from other countries. And, of course, a pariah is some sort of outcast or someone who's been shunned by society. The song's lyrics, to me, are directly about this, someone being shunned for being different or foreign. But Pollard offers to help, saying, Xeno Pariah, get out of the school, I'll fly you to school, and I'll tell you what to do. Bob wants to show this person how to belong in his society. And yet Pollard hints at the struggle that all immigrants face when they try to fit in, writing, the smile on your face is leaving no trace of the something that hides in you. Everyone who comes to this country for a better life has left something behind, sometimes entire worlds. And that's not easy, something that Bob acknowledges with the line, there'll be no denying the tears that you're crying. It reminds me of the line in the sort of similar Morrissey song, Bengali and Platforms, where he tells an immigrant that life is hard enough when you belong here. Looked at through this lens, Xeno Pariah is a chilling song, because even though Bob admits that there's something good inside the stranger he's writing about, Pollard admits that that's not enough. The song's subject must change before he's ultimately driven away. It was the fourth and final single released from the record. The B-side to Xeno Pariah was a re-recorded version of Little Jimmy the Giant. The original version of this song was released on the first Suitcase compilation and is so far the oldest Guided by Voices song in existence, having been originally recorded way back in 1974 when Bob was just 17 years old. It's a very fun and touching song about his brother, then in the 7th grade, who wasn't being taken seriously in sports because of his small size. Second song is Know Me Is Heavy.
Typist enraged, violence the page.
This is a fun song, although knowing the lyrics would go a long way towards helping me make some sense of it. There are some good lines in it, I think, except Bob sort of slurring his words and the vocals are pretty deep in the mix, and someone's singing along with Bob who really doesn't know the words, so it makes it difficult to tell what he's singing, but it sounds alright. Third song is Islands, She Talks in Rainbows.
Action scene, dining, waiting so long time.
This is an absolutely stellar Tobin Sprout track that's a bit faster than most of his others had been on the reunion records so far. While some of his songs in the last couple of LPs saw him barely singing above a whisper, here he's almost back to the territory of Under the Bushes gem, Atomize. The song was so good that it was issued as a single, which is rare for a Toby track. Consequence of Sound declared it the album's best song and wrote that, "The gorgeous 2 minutes feel like a warm beach blanket to curl inside." The song was written for his 2010 solo record, The Bluebirds of Happiness Tried to Land on My Shoulder, except that it didn't make the cut. The song didn't strike me at first, and so it got filed away, Tobin said, adding that, "Playing with the band gave it new life. I did an acoustic demo for Kevin that I liked a lot. I liked Kevin's drumming on it, and Mitch played the power guitar. It's a great song, and I especially like the last line of, 'So tell your mother she's just fine.' It reminds me of the last line of Frank Mills from the musical Hair. Tell him Angela and I don't want the $2 back, just him." Next track is Trash Can Full of Nails.
All dried out in a trash can full of nails, but it will not sit.
The AV Club described this song as the sort of tossed-off gem that Pollard excels at, weird, hooky, and completely nonsensical. I agree that it sounds tossed off. It might work as a 90-second song snippet, but at well over 3 minutes long, it quickly, for me anyway, wears out its welcome. And of course, since by this point Pollard had been writing, recording, and releasing songs like this for 25 years, he had no intention of changing his ways, because, as he writes in this track, better try not to fix what fails. The next song is Send a Celeste. This is a really interesting song. It sounds majestic and dramatic, almost like a Broadway show tune. Consequence of Sound wrote that, in the track, Pollard's pronounced vocal takes surprising leaps while he contemplates execution and drinking glasses in the same breath. It's pretty different from your standard GBV song, if you could define such a thing, and I love that Bob's continually coming up with weird and new styles. Next up is The Quiet Game.
You shout to schemes to do pleased. I felt so
This is a Tobin Sprout track which sees him channeling Pollard from the second song, Know Me Is Heavy, since the lyrics are mostly mumbled, indecipherable, and buried low in the mix. There's a riff that runs through most of the track, and while it's not bad, and it's recorded with some nice distortion, and the pace is faster than Sprout's usual tempo, this song just does nothing for me. It's probably my least favorite track by Toby of all the reunion LPs so far. Second to last track on side 1 is Noble Insect. This song's okay, but it's another one of the LP's singles that really doesn't seem to rise to the level of a single. There's not much to it, and it's really repetitive. Pitchfork called the song a dismal co-write from Pollard and Tobin Sprout that leaves neither side off the hook. And whereas past collaborations where Sprout provided the instrumentation and Pollard the lyrics gave birth to some really great songs, Hot Freaks probably being the best example, they're not really striking gold here. It should also be noted that there's a punk band out of Texas named Noble Insect. Last song on side 1 is Sir Garlic Breath.
With fingers and weeds, traced in blood. No one bleeds, no one needs. How comes?
This starts off as a really nice acoustic song similar to You Can Fly Anything Right or Chained to the Moon from the prior reunion LPs. But the song gets lost after about 30 seconds, and instead of creating a true melody, Pollard resorts to just singing low and then high. The last minute of the song is almost hard to listen to, with Bob slurring and making up the lyrics as he goes. It's a co-write with Greg Demos, so I guess that's him on the guitar. It was also recorded in Pollard's new quote-unquote home studio. Side 2 kicks off with Crybaby 4-Star Hotel.
She started crying. Look where I fell. To the crybaby poster hotel.
This song has a great title, but not much of a tune. It name-checks actor and comedian Zero Mostel, a Tony Award-winning performer who appeared on stage and screen, perhaps most memorably in the original film version of The Producers. He's also in a really nice film called The Front, which stars Woody Allen but is not written or directed by him. And whether or not this is the hotel where our Union bellboy from Class Clown Spots a UFO works, I don't know. Second song on side 2 is Biographer Seahorse. This is another song where the title is almost the most interesting thing about it. And the fact that this is the 5th so-so song in a row goes a long way towards why this is one of my least favorite GBB records. And it's not to say that this is a bad song. There's actually a ton of potential. Bob's singing in a really big and grand way, and the lyrics seem to hint at confusion and fear, Pollard writing. People don't know what's happening and people don't know what is going on. But the execution of the track is just too fuzzy and unfinished. I have a feeling that if this had been fleshed out a bit more, for example, if it had been on isolation drills and produced like those songs, it'd be a lot more effective. The next track is Flunky Minnows. This is a really nice track, getting back to some of the spirit and gems from the first side like Islands and Xeno Pariah. Pitchfork said the song is brimming with so many hooks, it spends its 2 minutes and change running around in circles begging you to take them off its hands. The lyrics are also pretty cool, like when Pollard declares that everything is wonderful and microscopes are fun. There's also a reference to the younger generations, similar to how on We Won't Apologize for the Human Race on the first reunion LP, Let's Go Eat the Factory, when Pollard name-checked Generations X and Z. Here he writes, "The younger diamonds hate your terminology, it's just their honesty." Next up is Birds.
Fly through society in wild variety, advancing to the touch.
It's interesting to me that this song is just called Birds. After all, on this LP alone we've been treated to Noble Insects, Flunky Minnows, and a Biographer Seahorse, so to have it be just plain Birds seems a bit boring. The song's another co-write with Tobin Sprout, and again, it's just okay. There's some nice background vocals by Bob, but there's not much happening musically, and the mid-tempo nature of the song doesn't really let Pollard let loose. The next song is The Sudden Death of Epstein's Ways.
From kingpin to butterfly, he says he's dancing with Jesus.
The AV Club called this Tobin Sprout song undoubtedly Little League's strongest moment. The Epstein being talked about is the Beatles manager who discovered the scruffy band playing lunchtime sets at the Cabinet Club and turned them into the biggest band in the world. However, once the band stopped touring, Epstein didn't have much to do, and this, combined with some turmoil in his personal life, he was gay at a time when homosexual activity was actually illegal in the UK, led to his untimely death at the age of just 32. Sprouts said of this song, "I was reading about the sudden death of Brian Epstein and other things in the 60s like Jesus freaks, the high that some people get when they find God and how it can change people for the better. And yet, Sprout's using Epstein here more as a symbol, Tobin explaining. It's not about Brian, it's about a generic lost person named Epstein who finds his way. This ties into past songs by Toby about similarly lost characters such as Esther's Day. Next up is Reflections in a Metal Whistle.
Charlie had his chance. Friction in Japan. Running with Teddy R.
This is another one of the tracks recorded at Pollard's new home studio. It sounds awful. The only other thing I can say about it is that a line from Noble Insect, Friction in Japan, comes up again. The next track is Taciturn Cave.
Taciturn cave, you heard me. Taciturn cave, you heard me.
This is the LP's longest track at almost 4 minutes. And while there's kind of a nice riff in there that sounds a bit like Black Sabbath's Paranoid, the song doesn't do much for me, especially towards the end when the song is just limping along. Website Popstash wrote in their review of the LP that the GBV diehards used to stick to the motto, "In Bob we trust." But it's hard not to have that trust shaken at this point. It's like Pollard is trapped in that taciturn cave he's singing about. Second to last song is A Burning Glass. This song is good as any to use as an example for the quality over quantity argument when it comes to just how much stuff Pollard's produced, as well as to cite just how bad some of it sounds. Plus, the fact that this is song number 16 on the 4th album in 2 years makes it hard for me to justify its inclusion on anything except maybe a Suitcase compilation, and even then I'd skip it when it came on. As I mentioned before, the LP didn't come with a lyric sheet except for this song, which is why I know for sure the song ends with the cause celebra, the fired fruit ball in glazed animation. The sun dances inside and dries the intestinal intimacy up. And while I appreciate that as poetry, I still think this track is a drag. Last song on the record is With Glass in Foot.
With glass in foot, you won't slip inside. With glass in foot, you won't lose my pride. You won't hold no eye on my street.
Built around a nice guitar riff that sounds an awful lot like Can't Explain, this is a nice return to form after a long run of lackluster songs. In fact, Consequence of Sound called this the record's best track, writing that it's a barroom jam that manages to sound like Bruce Springsteen fronting the So-So Glows. Sprout feels like he could veer off into the Replacement's Alex Chilton at any point, and the song accomplishes all that without wasting any of your precious time in a cool 2 minutes and 20 seconds. I agree that it's a fun song and a good way to end the LP. And when Pollard yells out, "It's good to not obey," he's not only sounding like The Who circa 1964, but he's also channeling their anti-authoritarian attitude. Bob, however, did not die before he got old, and for that I'm glad. Okay, that's it for the show. In 2 weeks, we'll be looking at GBV's 20th record, Motivational Jumpsuit. It was one of 2 records the band released in 2014, and it was the last to feature original lineup member Kevin Fennell. eBay, I hope you're happy. Until then, subscribe to the show, leave a review, and God bless the Monument Club.
This on the settler.